spent 63 years learning that the quietest warnings are usually the loudest ones. It's not a siren or a phone call at 2 in the morning that tells you something is wrong. It's the way your stomach drops when your daughter-in-law's name lights up your screen on a Tuesday afternoon, and you already know, before you even answer, that this conversation is going to cost you something. Hi, Mom. She always called me Mom. Had since the wedding, 7 years ago, said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, which I now understand was precisely the point. Her name was Serena. My son Elliot had met her at a fundraising gala for a children's hospital, which, looking back, has a certain ugly irony to it. She was 31, he was 34, and she had the kind of beauty that made people in restaurants turn and look twice. I'd liked her genuinely in the beginning. She was warm and quick and laughed at my jokes. My late husband Gerald would have adored her, but Gerald passed 4 years ago, and somewhere in those 4 years, Serena had quietly, methodically become someone I barely recognized. "I'm so glad I caught you," she said. "Elliot's birthday is coming up, and I'm planning something really special, a surprise trip. He's been so exhausted from the office. You know how it's been." I did know. My son ran a small but respected civil engineering firm. He worked the kind of hours that leave rings under your eyes that no amount of sleep ever fully fixes. I'd been worried about him for months. The last time we'd had lunch together, he'd looked thin in a way that made me want to feed him soup and tell him to slow down. "That sounds lovely," I said. I was standing at my kitchen sink, watching a cardinal on the bird feeder outside my window. Something about the pleasantness in her voice made me grip the phone a little tighter. "The thing is," she continued, and there it was, the pivot, the real reason for the call. "I want to book a first-class package. Somewhere really beautiful. We both deserve it after everything. I was hoping you might add me to your credit card as an authorized user just for the trip, for emergencies. You know how these international charges can be unpredictable." The cardinal flew away. I stood very still for a moment. Serena had her own cards. Elliot had his own cards. They owned a 4-bedroom house in a suburb with good schools and a yard the children loved. My son was not a struggling man, so why, I found myself thinking, does she need mine? "Let me think on it," I said carefully. "When are you booking?" "Tonight, actually. The deal expires." A small pause. "I just thought, if anything happened while we were away, it would be such a comfort to know there was a backup, for the children's sake." The children. My grandchildren, Maeve, who had just turned 7 and had Gerald's stubborn chin, and little Theo, 4 years old and still soft around the edges in the way that 4-year-olds are. I thought of them, and I said I'd call her back. My sister-in-law lives 2 streets over, has for 30 years. Her name is Opal, and she is the most pragmatic human being I have ever encountered. She once talked me through filing my own taxes after Gerald died, line by line, for 4 hours, and she did it without a single complaint. I called her the moment I hung up with Serena. "She's using the children as the reason," I told her. "That's the tell right there." "It always is," Opal said. "Did Elliot mention this trip to you?" He hadn't. We'd spoken Sunday. He'd talked about a bridge project he was behind schedule on, about Theo's ear infection, about wanting to get the gutters cleaned before fall. He had not once mentioned a vacation. "Trust your gut," Opal said, "and don't give her anything she doesn't already have access to." I called Serena back and told her the card I had set aside for family emergencies, the one I'd established specifically for Elliot's use after Gerald passed, was the most I could offer. It had a meaningful but limited balance. She thanked me with such gushing warmth that I felt faintly nauseous after we hung up. 6 weeks later, I was in my car. I'd tried reaching Elliot since Monday. He wasn't answering his cell, which wasn't entirely unusual during a heavy work week, but something felt wrong in a way I couldn't shake. On Thursday morning, I called his office, and his assistant, a young man named Perry, who had always been genuinely fond of my son, answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, and something in the way he said my name told me everything before he said another word. "Elliot collapsed yesterday afternoon at the Hartfield site. The paramedics got there fast. He's at Riverside General. I don't remember the drive. I remember parking. I remember the automatic doors of the emergency entrance sliding open and the blast of cold hospital air hitting me in the face. I remember giving his name at the desk and watching the woman's expression shift into something careful and professional as she looked at her screen. "He's in the cardiac ICU," she said. "Room 312. Cardiac ICU. I counted my breaths the way my doctor once taught me. In through the nose, out slow. When I pushed open the door to room 312, I stopped in the doorway. Elliot was in the bed, connected to more machines than I had ever seen attached to a single person. The monitors beeped steadily. The blinds were half drawn, and the light in the room was that particular gray that hospital rooms always have, like the color of waiting. He was unconscious, his chest rising and falling with the help of a ventilator, and the room was empty. No wife sitting beside him, no one holding his hand, just my son, alone, with the machines and the gray light. I don't know how long I stood in the doorway. Long enough that a nurse appeared at my elbow. "Are you family?" "I'm his mother," I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from the end of a long corridor. Her name was Donna, according to her badge. She was gentle and efficient, the kind of nurse who has seen enough that she knows exactly how to deliver hard information without making it feel cruel. She told me Elliot had suffered a serious cardiac event, a blocked artery, the kind they call the widowmaker when they want to make sure you understand the stakes. He'd been found by a coworker who started CPR immediately. The response had been fast. The surgery had gone as well as could be hoped, but he was critical, and the next 48 hours mattered. "His emergency contact," I said. "His wife. Has she been notified?" Donna checked the chart. "Mrs. Calloway was contacted immediately after admission. We've been trying to reach her since yesterday afternoon." I sat down in the chair beside my son's bed. I took his hand. His skin was warm, which I told myself meant something. "She hasn't come," I said. It wasn't a question. "No, ma'am." I sat with him for a while without looking at my phone. I talked to him about nothing. The garden, the book I was reading, the way Maeve had asked me last week to teach her to bake his favorite lemon cake. I told him Theo had finally learned to pump his own legs on the swing. I kept my voice even. I didn't let myself think about where Serena was. And then I picked up my phone. Her Instagram was public. She'd never bothered to make it private, which I'd always thought was a small vanity. She posted often. Brunch photos, sunset photos, carefully composed pictures of her wardrobe and her table settings and her children in their best clothes. I scrolled back 2 days. There she was, a white sundress, oversized sunglasses, a turquoise ocean so bright it looked fake. She was laughing in the photo, her head tilted back, and her hand was resting on the arm of a man who was definitely not my son. He was younger, broad-shouldered, with the specific kind of good looks that suggested he knew it. The caption said, "Finally breathing," with a small wave emoji. I scrolled back further. More photos, more ocean, more of him. And then my phone buzzed with an alert from the emergency account I'd given her access to. A charge, $7,000 at a resort in Turks and Caicos. I called Opal. "She's in Turks and Caicos," I said, "with another man, using my account, while my son is on a ventilator." There was a silence on Opal's end that felt like the intake of breath before something breaks. "Tell me what you need," she said. What I needed was simple. I had co-signing authority on Elliot's major accounts. He'd arranged it after Gerald died. Quietly, practically, the way Elliot did everything. It had been for emergencies, he'd said, in case something happened to him and someone needed to act quickly. Something had happened to him. I acted quickly, joint checking, frozen. Joint savings, frozen. The credit card accounts with Serena listed as authorized user suspended. The emergency account I had given her access to closed entirely. I made the calls from the family lounge down the hall from room 312, moving through each one with the kind of focus that only comes when you have no room left for anything except the task in front of you. It took 41 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the entire time. My daughter-in-law called 53 minutes after I froze the last account. I was back in the chair beside Elliot's bed holding his hand when her name came up on my screen. I looked at it for 2 rings. Then I answered. "There seems to be a problem with the cards," she said. Her voice had that controlled quality people use when they are trying very hard not to sound panicked. "Everything is coming back, declined. I think there might be a bank error." How inconvenient, I said pleasantly. A pause. Elliot usually handles these things. I haven't been able to reach him, and I don't want to bother him while he's working, but I really need. He's not working, I said. He's in the cardiac ICU at Riverside General. He's been there since yesterday afternoon, which I imagine you already know, since the hospital contacted you immediately after he was admitted. The silence that followed was long enough to have its own weight. She started and then stopped. The resort looks beautiful, I said. Turks and Caicos in October is supposed to be lovely. Is your friend enjoying it as well? I heard her breath catch. The accounts are frozen because my son is unconscious and alone in a hospital room, I continued, keeping my voice the same temperature throughout, and the person listed as his emergency contact chose not to come home. As his co-signer, I made a decision to protect his assets. I think that's exactly what he would have wanted, don't you? She hung up. I set my phone face down on the arm of the chair and looked at my son's face. I'm here, I told him. I'm not going anywhere. Opal arrived within 2 hours with a bag that contained a change of clothes for me, a thermos of coffee, and 3 of the granola bars I like. She set up in the family lounge with her crossword puzzle and her sensible shoes and became, without anyone asking, the logistics coordinator of the next 72 hours. She called Elliot's firm to notify them. She arranged for Maeve and Theo to stay with Opal's daughter and her husband, who lived 20 minutes away and had been asking for months to be more involved with the kids. The children thought it was a sleepover adventure. They didn't know yet. Elliot's doctor was a woman named Dr. No. Nakamura, who had the kind of quiet authority that comes from being very good at something difficult for a long time. She explained everything to me with patience and precision. The artery, the surgery, the stent, the recovery window. She told me the sedation would be reduced the next morning and that she was cautiously optimistic. When you say cautiously, I said, I mean that I have reason to hope, she said. I don't say that to everyone. I stayed the night in the chair beside him. At some point around 4 a.m, I fell asleep holding his hand, and when I woke up, his fingers had tightened slightly around mine. I don't know if it was involuntary. I chose to believe it wasn't. By Saturday morning, they began reducing the sedation. I was talking to him about the lemon cake again, about Maeve's very serious and detailed questions about which kind of zest was better when his eyes opened, not all the way, just a slow, effortful lift like someone coming up from deep water. Mom. His voice was barely there, scraped raw from the breathing tube they'd removed earlier that morning. I'm here, I said. You're in the hospital. You're going to be fine. He looked around the room with the slow confusion of someone whose brain is still sorting through what's real. His eyes moved to the door, then back to me. Where's Serena? I had been dreading that question since the moment I walked into the room 2 days ago. I kept my voice steady. She's been traveling, I said. I've been here with you. Opal, too. His face tightened. Not in surprise. In something else. A kind of resignation that was harder to look at than confusion would have been. How long? He asked. Since Thursday afternoon. It's Saturday morning now. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then, quietly, she knew. I waited. I called her Wednesday night, he said. I'd been having chest pains for 2 days. I told her. She said it was probably stress and that I needed to stop being dramatic. A pause. She'd been distant for weeks, months, really. I thought it was the marriage. I didn't think. He stopped. Where is she? My phone was on the bedside table. His eyes moved to it. He'd seen her name on the screen enough times to recognize her contact photo. Show me, he said. I didn't want to. But he asked again, and he was awake, and he was my son, and he had a right to know what had been happening in his own life. I turned the phone toward him. He looked at the Instagram photos for a long time without speaking. I watched his face. It didn't crumple. It went still, which was worse. His name is Marcus Finley, Elliot said finally. He owns a landscaping company. She hired him 8 months ago. I stared at him. I found out in August, he said. I've been talking to my attorney since September. He closed his eyes briefly. I was trying to do it right. Protect the kids. Make sure the finances were clean before I filed. He let out a breath. I didn't expect to end up here. My son, the engineer, the planner, the man who triple checks his calculations before he signs off on anything. Even his own divorce had been approached methodically, carefully, and still life had found a way to get ahead of him. She took money from my account, he said. She took money from mine, I told him. I've frozen everything. He looked at me for a long moment. Then something crossed his face that might, in different circumstances, have been a smile. Of course you did. His attorney, whose name was Rowan, was a trim, efficient woman in her late 40s who arrived that afternoon with a leather briefcase and the expression of someone who had been waiting to make several important phone calls. Elliot had already messaged her from his hospital bed. She sat in the chair across from him, glanced at the monitors once in the way that people do when they're trying not to seem like they're looking, and then opened her briefcase with the brisk click of someone ready to work. She told us what she had: 8 weeks of documentation, photographs, financial records, phone records obtained legally through the discovery process Elliot had already quietly initiated, a pattern of transfers from the joint account, small amounts, nothing that would trigger an alert, totaling just under $30,000 over 6 months. A name she'd been in contact with, an attorney in Florida who handled asset transfers for people who were planning to relocate. Florida. She was moving, Elliot said. It wasn't a question. It appears that way, Rowan said. We found a lease application submitted last month for a property in Sarasota. 2 adults, 2 children. The 2 children. My grandchildren. I set my coffee cup down very carefully because my hands were not entirely steady. She was taking Maeve and Theo to Florida, I said. That was the plan, yes, before she had legal authority to do so. Rowan looked at me. Which she does not have. And which she will not obtain. Serena called while Rowan was still in the room. Elliot looked at his phone and then at his attorney, who gave a small nod. He answered it and put it on speaker. Elliot. Her voice came through the phone changed, scraped down to something that sounded almost genuine. Baby, I'm so glad you're awake. I'd been so scared. I've been trying to get home, but the flights... Stop, he said. Not loudly, just firmly, like closing a door, a silence. I know about Marcus Finley, he said. I know about the money. I know about the apartment in Sarasota. Another pause. My attorney is here, and this call is being recorded. I want you to know that divorce papers will be filed Monday morning. The sound that came through the phone then was not crying exactly. It was the sound of a calculation being revised in real time. You can't, she said. Elliot, you just had a heart attack. You're not thinking clearly. I love you. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I love you and the kids need. The kids are safe, he said. They're with family. They don't need to hear any of this. You're doing this because of your mother. Her voice shifted, took on an edge. She's been against me since the beginning, and now she's in your ear while you're lying in a hospital bed and you can't think straight. My mother drove to this hospital alone at 63 years old and sat in a chair beside my bed for 2 days, he said, while you were in Turks and Caicos. A pause. I think clearly, Serena. That's always been my problem with you. You counted on me not to. The call ended. Rowan gathered her papers without comment, which I respected. Serena came home 2 days later. I was at the house when she arrived. I had been staying there to manage the children's routine while Elliot was still in the hospital, and I heard the cab pull up before I heard the door. I had 40 seconds, approximately. I used them to move Maeve and Theo into the backyard with Opal, who had come by with soup, under the pretense of checking on Opal's car. Children are more perceptive than adults want to believe, but they are also beautifully distractible at 7 and 4. Serena looked like someone who had slept very little and cried a great deal. The designer luggage was rumpled. The confident posture I had always associated with her was gone, replaced with something smaller. Where are my children? She said, before she was fully through the door. In the backyard, I said. They're fine. She looked around the house. The dishes done, the children's drawings on the refrigerator, the small evidence of normalcy maintained, and something in her expression flickered. You should know, I said, keeping my voice level, that an emergency temporary custody order was filed this morning, Until the divorce proceedings are complete, the children remain here. You can speak with Rowan about visitation. You can't do that. But the certainty that should have been in her voice wasn't there. It's already done. She sat down on the bottom stair. Not because I'd invited her to. Just because her legs seemed to decide it for her. I didn't want any of this, she said, and there was something in her voice that was hard to dismiss entirely, even then. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I stood in my son's hallway and looked at this woman who had betrayed him in almost every way a person can be betrayed. And I thought about what I wanted to say. I believe you didn't plan for it to go this far, I said. But it did. And there are 2 children in the backyard who are going to spend a very long time sorting through the consequences of choices you made while you were telling yourself it wasn't that serious. She looked up at me. They need their mother, I said. That's a true thing, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But they need a version of their mother who shows up, who answers the phone, who comes home. I paused. Can you be that person? I genuinely don't know. I think you might not know either. But that's the only version of you that gets to be part of this family's life going forward. The back door opened and Maeve's voice came through the house asking whether it was time for a snack, and then she saw her mother sitting on the stairs and she stopped. The look on her face was the same look I'd seen on my son's face in the hospital. Not surprise, not joy. Something measured and careful, like a person stepping onto ice they're not sure will hold. "Hi, Mom," she said. "Hi, baby." Serena's voice broke on the second word. Maeve stood there for a moment. Then she walked over and sat down on the stair beside her mother, not touching her, just near. Like she was reserving judgment. Like she had learned at 7 years old that love and trust are not the same thing. I went to get the snacks. Elliot came home 5 days later, thinner and slower than he'd been, but himself. The children made a banner. Theo's contribution was a drawing of what he said was a heart, and which looked more like a red potato. But the intention was clear. I watched my son walk through his front door and stop when he saw it, and I saw his face do the thing that faces do when something hits you in the place you keep, the things that matter most. The weeks after that were not simple. Nothing about this kind of thing is simple. There were attorneys and court dates and a mediator, and one very difficult afternoon when Maeve asked me directly why her parents weren't going to live together anymore. And I sat with her on the back porch for a long time and tried to be honest without being more honest than a 7-year-old needed me to be. Serena came to her supervised visits. She was on time. She was, by all accounts, present in a way she hadn't been in a long time. Whether that would last, I couldn't say. I am 63 years old and I have stopped pretending I can predict what people will do. I only know what they've done. What I know is this. My son is alive. My grandchildren are in their own beds, in their own house, with their father, who is eating better and sleeping more and has hired a project manager to take some of the weight off his shoulders. Opal comes by twice a week, and we sit in the garden and argue about whether I'm overwatering the roses, which I'm not. Maeve learned to make the lemon cake. She is very serious about the zesting. She will tell you at length why the zester matters, and why you should never use pre-packaged lemon juice. And she sounds exactly like her grandfather when she says it. I think about the Tuesday afternoon in October when Serena's name appeared on my phone and my stomach dropped before I even answered. I think about the cardinal on the bird feeder. I think about the 41 minutes it took to freeze every account and the 53 minutes before Serena called. People ask me sometimes what the right thing to do was. When to trust, when to act, when to wait, and when to move fast. I don't have a philosophy. I'm not that organized. I only know what I knew then. My son was alone in a room with machines keeping him breathing, and no one was coming. So I came, and I kept coming. That's the whole of it, really. That's all it ever is. You show up, you stay. You don't let them be alone with the machines and the gray light. The rest sorts itself out eventually. I've been thinking, in the months since all of this happened, about what I actually believe. Not what I was taught to believe, not what sounds right when you say it out loud at a dinner table, but what I actually know to be true after 63 years of watching how things turn out. Here is what I know. The choices we make quietly when we think no one is watching are the ones that build the life we end up living. Serena didn't wake up one morning and decide to abandon a man in a cardiac ICU. She made 100 smaller decisions before that. To take a little money here, to lie about a small thing there, to tell herself the discomfort she felt wasn't really guilt, just stress. Each one was survivable. Each one made the next one easier. And then one day, she was in Turks and Caicos posting photos while her husband was on a ventilator, and she probably still couldn't fully explain to herself how she'd gotten there. That's how it works. Not in one dramatic moment, but in increments so small you barely notice them adding up. And on the other side of that, Elliot, my son spent months doing the hard, unglamorous work of being careful, of gathering facts before he made accusations, of protecting his children before he blew up his own life. He was in pain for a long time and he carried it quietly because he'd decided the people who depended on him mattered more than his own immediate relief. That's not weakness. That's the hardest kind of strength there is, the kind that doesn't get applause while you're doing it. I think about Maeve sitting down next to her mother on the stairs, not running to her, not pulling away from her, just sitting near her with that careful, watchful stillness. 7 years old and already understanding something that takes most adults decades to learn, that love doesn't require you to abandon your own judgment, that you can care about someone and still see them clearly. I don't know where she learned that. I hope some part of it came from watching the adults around her try, imperfectly and sometimes too late, to do the right thing. What I keep coming back to is this: none of it required extraordinary courage. I'm not a brave woman in any dramatic sense. I drove to a hospital. I made some phone calls. I sat in a chair for 2 days and talked about lemon cake and rose bushes. What I did was simple. I showed up and I stayed, and I didn't look away when things were hard to look at. I think that's what integrity actually is when you get down to it. Not a grand gesture, just the decision, repeated quietly every single day, to be present for the people who need you. To not look away, to not let the discomfort of a situation become an excuse to be somewhere easier. Serena chose easier. Over and over again, she chose easier. And easier cost her everything she said she wanted. I'm not telling you this to be unkind to her. I genuinely hope she finds her way to being the mother those children deserve. But I think the most honest thing I can say about this whole experience is that the outcome wasn't random. It wasn't luck or fate or anything mystical. It was just the logical end of a long series of choices, arriving exactly on schedule. Your choices are building something right now, whether you're paying attention or not. I hope you're building something you'll want to live in.